So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 25th meeting of the Rural Affairs, Climate Change and Environment Committee. Can you make sure your mobile phones and Blackberries are switched off because they can affect the sound system? I have apologies from Jim Hume. And agenda item 1 is subordinate legislation. First item today is consideration of two negative instruments as listed on the agenda. One relates to snaring and the other relates to environmental policy making. Members should note that no motion to annul, no motions have been received in relation to these instruments, and I refer members to the paper. Does anyone wish to make any comments on the two items? If not, is the committee agreed that it does not wish to make any recommendations in relation to these instruments? Agreed? Thank you very much. We can now move on to agenda item 2, the Crown Estate in Scotland. And this item on the agenda today is for the committee to hear from the Crown Estate in Scotland in the light of its response to the Scottish Affairs Committee report that it will engage with this committee annually on its priorities, work and operations in Scotland. And I would welcome the witnesses to the meeting. Ronnie Quinn, Lead for Energy and Infrastructure in Scotland. Good morning. Alex Adrian, the Aquaculture Manager. Good morning. And Alan Laidlaw, Rural and Coastal Portfolio Manager in Scotland. Good morning. I would invite Ronnie to make any introductory remarks that he wishes to, bearing in mind that we have a lot of questions to ask you. Good morning.
Good morning, Convener. Thank you very much. If I may, first of all, tender the apologies of Gareth Baird, the Scottish Commissioner, who would like to have been here this morning, but unfortunately, or fortunately, is on annual leave at present, so can't be here, but he sends his best wishes. For my part, as you said, I lead for energy and infrastructure in Scotland. I've got three key areas of priority going forward. That's the delivery of offshore wind, the Pentland Firth and Orkney Waters scheme and offshore marine renewables in general, and last but not least, the possibility and availability of the deep water test and demonstration sites that could unlock the deeper water around about the shores of Scotland. If I could now just hand on briefly to Alex, who can just give you a quick highlight of the focus for aquaculture.
Thank you. Good morning. As Ronnie said, my name is Alex Adrian. I lead for the Crown Estate on aquaculture business. I'm also joint technical lead with our chief scientist on our emerging marine biomass business. Today, I'm happy to update you on the role of the Crown Estate in aquaculture subsequent to the transfer of planning controls to local authorities, our ongoing support for industry with regard to sponsorship, research and development, and then just our participation and our collaboration with Marine Scotland and other bodies on aquaculture business in Scotland.
I'm Alan Laidlaw. I look after the rural and coastal business in Scotland, and the three areas that we're concentrating on from my point of view at the moment are partnership orientation and working with our tenants and co-investment, enhancing the economic performance of our assets and opening up opportunities for Scotland, and then engaging with local communities and communications and improving our role therein.
Well, thank you very much. I think we should go straight to the formalisation of your relationship with us. Given that you're responsible it's a reserved matter to the UK Parliament, nevertheless, you've agreed that you'd be happy to come annually to the committee to submit your report for examination by the committee. In that light, I take it that the report which you produce in the summer is something which is likely to be a continuing timetable for you. So in that case, would you expect to come to see us in the autumn? Any time from September?
Autumn would work well for that report, and if that could fit in with the committee's business, that would work quite well.
Okay. in order that we are able to think about the way in which this works, it's important to know what your business plan was and indeed what your long-term strategy is, and that we hope to explore that just now. You know, the Scotland report, you know, is one of these documents that, you know, you supply. It's merely an abstract of certain information from the overall report that's made annually. We'd like to explore some of the detail of, you know, what it contains, because it seems to us it's only a partial report, and indeed that it tends to be one which says you're doing a lot, but doesn't give us the detail that we might like to know. Are you aware of criticisms of that sort of the report from other sources?
I have to confess I am not. And if you have any questions, then we will try and answer them today.
Well, you know, we've got to make sure that the 2013 report perhaps contains a good deal more detail about some of the aspects of not just income, but investment, for example. And I have a question about that from my colleague here, Graham Day.
Okay, good morning, gentlemen. Just reading through the report, what I pick up from it is that you generated about £11.9 million in income from Scotland last year. Would that be right? Could you maybe outline for us how much of that was reinvested in Scotland, and perhaps outline for us how you envisage that percentage of reinvestment increasing or decreasing over the coming years?
I mean, in terms of capital investment in different projects, obviously we split revenue and capital, all of our revenue surplus going to the Treasury. Capital projects and capital investments we make when they fit with our business plan requirements, and at the moment the areas that we're looking to grow, for example in my part of the portfolio, rural and coastal, are things like ports and harbours, enabling the offshore energy side of things. On the rural side, looking at making sure our fixed equipment and holdings are in a modern and fit state, and looking at creating opportunities for tourism, public recreation and things like that. So we're doing quite a lot with mountain bike trails at Glenlivet, and with investment into equipment to help marine leisure tourism. And those come up each year as and when. So we have a sort of opportunity to bid for funds, if you like, when projects come up. This year, the capital investment figures that I'm aware of looking forward to the year end, as long as nothing drastic like huge snow damage at Glenlivet happens, is that we looks like we'll be a net investor because of some quite big projects that are ongoing. That all depends on the timing of those projects going forward, but there's money available to look at how and where we invest. So I would see that the figure of investment is going up on my side of things, but maybe leave Ronnie to comment further on the offshore energy.
Yeah. So far as renewable energy is concerned in particular, the investment that we've already discussed and made, a commitment we've made to the Pentland Firth and Orkney Waters alone is £5.7 million. No, that's over the programme, the course of the programme.
Which runs for?
Well, until it starts delivering. So that 5.7 million has been used to fund enabling actions, things like ornithological cumulative impact assessments, aerial surveys, cumulative impact assessment workshops into the Rochdale envelope, joint citation protocol, marine protected areas network, socioeconomic methodologies, nearshore surveys and deployment of first phases, as well as strategic energy resource measurements. So it's to undertake those works to help de-risk and accelerate those projects within the Pentland Firth and Orkney Waters programme.
But, sorry, just to develop this, it may be a simplistic question, but I'm looking for a ballpark figure. Out of 11.9 million in the last year, was 20% reinvested in Scotland, would you guess? 25, less? What sort of figure?
I could say that for as you, in fact, you should be able to see from the report, the income received in respect of renewables in Scotland was somewhere in the region of £600,000, £700,000. That was the income received. The investment made this year, predicted for this year, will be somewhere in the region of 3.8 million.
Of course, within that, reading from your report, is this issue about the valuation of wind farms from the round 3. So it's an investment that's going to lead to considerable income.
Round 3 is separate from that. And in fact, that's something that's worth pointing out. The numbers and the figures for investment in respect of round 3 aren't included in these figures because they're part of the UK programme and dealt with as such. So the investment both to developers in respect of round 3 and in respect of the enabling actions for round 3 for which the sites benefit aren't included in this. Yes.
Why is the investment in Scottish Waters separated from the Scottish report? Why is it not organised in terms of the report you make to us and available in that fashion?
Round 3 is simply being viewed as a UK programme. There's a clear line of sight into the UK overall picture. The enabling actions and the work streams that we are using for round 3 and the investment we're using for round 3 aren't peculiar to the Scottish projects. It's seen as a whole. The entire programme has been delivered as a whole, and that's why it's been dealt with in that way.
So, from an accounting point of view, will that continue to be the case? So we'll never actually know what income is coming from offshore renewables in Scottish waters? It will always be accounted for separately?
Going forward, I think the position on the income derived from these sites, I'll be honest and say I'm not entirely sure how that's going to be dealt with. That's a fair bit away at this point in time. We don't have any income coming from it at all at this stage in time. It's all investment, as you can imagine.
Thank you, sir.
It's a short period of investment, but a long period of likely income when they're up and running.
It's quite a large investment at risk, it has to be said, convener, because there's no guarantee, to be honest, that these sites will come forward. So it's an investment that's made at risk, and the sites still have to go through the consenting process. Marine Scotland has to make the decision on it, and then the companies themselves have to make the decision as to whether or not to go ahead with the substantial investment that they will need to make to build out these sites. So if they don't build these sites out, then there is a possibility that the return on investment would be nil. Obviously, that's what we're hoping to avoid, and we're trying to work to make that, or to minimise that as much as we possibly can. But it is an investment at risk at this point in time.
Don't get me wrong, I think most people realise that the management of the sea has to take place. The conditions, however, in Scottish waters, which you would think would be part of the role of the management board in Scotland, is something that I think, you really need to take away and inform the board in London that, we have concerns about that. Because we want to see what the precise functions of the board in Scotland are, who's on it and when it will meet and whether its activities will be made public and how it formally links into the overall governance of the Crown Estate.
Convener, that there is as you're aware, there is a management board in Scotland. If I had believed that the terms of reference for the management board and the governance structure was available on the website. If they're not, I'll make sure they're sent on to the clerk.
Well, given that we're into issues that already cut across the work of the board in Scotland and indeed the overall UK approach, you can understand why we're trying to probe a bit further on this. Claudia Beamish, you wanted to ask about this matter, did you?
Yes,
Please
thank you,
do.
Convener. Good morning. A quite straightforward question, which might be quite difficult to answer. But I wonder if any of you could clarify for the committee what income in the round comes from the Scottish estate and how much investment there is specifically in Scotland.
When you say in the round, in
Yes.
terms of the sort of overall gross figure for Scotland was
Yes,
12 points.
rural,
so a breakdown.
marine. No, I'm not asking for a breakdown. You're asking me what I mean by in the round. I mean everything.
Right. The overall global figure for Scotland's 12.3 million gross revenue per annum. That's broken down: marine 8.3, rural 3.2, and then our urban portfolio, which is pretty small at 0.8 million. So those are the gross figures there. In terms of investment, I'll speak to the rural and coastal side. We've got a long-term sort of investment program in the rural estate into fixed equipment and new opportunities that runs between 1.8 and 2.7 million a year, something around there, which is quite often ahead of the revenue. In coastal, we put around about 1.1 million in, I think, this year. But again, that's dependent on projects progressing. I can think of 3 or 4 large-scale ports and harbours investment projects that we're looking at the moment, or a reasonable scale, should I say, that it depends on whether those go forward. So at that level, you'd be saying that rural and coastal are investing somewhere around 3 to 4 million per annum. And if Ronnie can cover the energy side of things.
Yes, again, the renewable side from last year's results, the income was 700,000, investment was substantially more than that, and indeed, as I say, projected for this year, investment is about 3.8 million, income roughly about the same.
Right. Convener, if I can just push that
Yes,
a little further. While I appreciate that you've already, Mr. Quinn, highlighted the issue of the round 3 and and it might be difficult to break it down into annual figures, but what I'm trying to ascertain is really the amount of income that comes from the Scottish estate, per se, and how much, to reassure the committee about how much is actually coming in. Okay, maybe you've given me a lot of breakdown figures, but what I'm looking for, if not today, then at another point, please, from the Crown Estate, if this is possible, which I hope it is something about, what is being invested in Scotland, in total.
We'd be happy to provide that overall breakdown. And if there's details that you particularly want to see, if you can let us know, we'll be happy to provide that afterwards. I think probably better.
It would have been reassuring if we could have had those figures, I think, today, because it's quite an important issue in relation to, what our brief is. We're looking at what is the income and what the investment is. And obviously how it's done and what it goes into is very important, but we'd like to understand that. I would like to understand as a member of the committee, I will not speak for the rest of the committee, the overall figures for Scotland. Thank you.
Okay, Convener.
Yes.
Just to put in the bit for aquaculture. Aquaculture is an established business. It has been in Scotland for 30 years for us, and we have an ongoing research and development budget and sponsorship budget, which equates to between 10 and 15% of revenues. That's ongoing every year. So it just adds to the pot and adds to the mix.
One of the issues which was noted, because you talk about having a strong portfolio of properties, was the sale of a Scottish asset in order that you might invest in supermarket property in England. What sort of view do you take about your assets in Scotland in the committee, which the Scottish Commissioner is in charge of, with regard to this kind of transfer of property and assets to invest elsewhere?
The Scottish Management Board would look at any major or sensitive transaction sales, because I think it's not just about the sale, it's also about the understanding of what the asset is. I think you're probably sort of talking about one of the urban property sales there. we look at opportunities right across the UK as to where investment fits with our criteria. And at the moment, there's quite a lot of activity in the urban property market, and we're looking to take value where it is. So because we are not allowed to borrow under the Crown Estate Act, we need to recycle our own capital to be able to continue to invest. So disposals and property sales and investment opportunities are discussed. Each sort of portfolio manager would bring forward proposals that they believed fit with our investment criteria. I can look at things that we've been looking at on the rural and coastal side over the last few months that we've brought forward to try and progress. So that I suppose it's a bid process where you're looking to say, there's money here available. We have a suitable project that meets our investment criteria. But to be able to have that sort of portfolio investment approach, we do have to recycle capital, and that's where those decisions are sort of taken.
Nigel Don wants to come in on this. Vina, can I just pursue that issue, because I think it's something fairly close to the heart of quite a lot of folk here. If I've heard you are right, Mr. Laidlaw, what you're suggesting then is that capital is moved around at least the UK and conceivably perhaps around the world, but let's assume it's within the UK for the moment, to fit your investment criteria. Now, that's a phrase I understand, I think. Would you accept, though, that to those of us in Scotland, that might be in conflict with the idea that the assets of Scotland should perhaps remain within Scotland? I suspect the English might feel the same, but maybe they haven't addressed the issue. Would you recognise there is a conflict between your notion, as I understand it, of simply moving capital around the UK, with those of us who would feel that maybe Scottish assets are actually Scottish assets?
I can assure you that it's not moved around the world, because we're not allowed to operate anywhere other than in UK shores. So rest assured that that's the case. I'm a proud Scot, and I want to see the best for Scotland. If I look at projects such as our mountain biking investment at Glenlivet, that's a £500,000 project for working with Cairngorms National Park, Moray, European funding and ourselves. And that is definitely benefiting from a wider pool of capital than the Glenlivet estate could generate. That is by far a net benefactor from our wider portfolio approach. And the cycle that property has, and my area of expertise is more rural property, you can't always have capital coming from the same places at all the same time. Sources of capital that we used to have 7 or 8 years ago from development in Scotland for house sales or something like that were quite significant. They're doing quite well. Those in the last couple of years have completely fallen off the radar because the market isn't there. And so the portfolio approach that I mentioned gives us that strength to be able to invest at times when actually income from Scotland or capital from Scotland isn't available. So I entirely understand the point about Scotland's sort of assets being retained in Scotland, but I think we do benefit north of the border from capital to be able to come from other avenues, and that is significantly the urban portfolio at times.
There is always going to be a benefit of a bigger pool in principle. Can I then question how the Scottish board, is that the right title for yourselves? Scottish management anyway, the Crown Estate, views that? Because you really have, I suggest, two options, one of which is to say, well, we're just part of the bigger thing and we do whatever the bigger thing tells us, and the other, at the other extreme, is to say, well, actually, no, we're going to look after Scotland's assets and we're going to see what we can drag here. I'm putting words into your mouth, feel free to disagree with me, but how do you feel you manage that dilemma?
I think from my point of view, anyone who comes across me is, I'm charged with looking after the portfolio and growing that. I've got a growth target. So individually, I fight for everything that I can get that benefits my portfolio, and my portfolio stops at the border. So, I personally have, keen targets and keen to deliver against that. But also I do appreciate that we benefit in these areas. So we have a portfolio approach that I think works. I think in particular, and not wishing to say anything on behalf of Ronnie, but the fact that the capital was sort of invested into renewables at the moment is significantly more than the income coming from it is absolutely sort of a perfect case study of that example. So I would say that we do operate on a Scottish basis where we can to bring opportunities forward. I would say at times I'm frustrated that more opportunities don't come forward from the wider market, and that's something that is in my objectives for this year. I'm quite new to the coastal side of my role, and one of the main objectives that I have is to go out and look for new opportunities with my team and my colleagues to try and make sure that we can invest more in Scotland.
Could I just endorse that position? I think I and my colleagues in Scotland see it as part of our role to draw on that central pool for Scotland. A good example from a marine cultivation point of view, again, is our marine biomass sector, which again is being looked at from the Crown Estate's position as a whole, but we are certainly pushing, and I think we're being successful in proposing that the various demonstration projects that we're hoping to undertake, and the investment in that sector is undertaken in Scotland.
And as you would expect, both so far as the specific position in respect of Scotland's concerned, but in the wider position with regard to round 3, the energy and infrastructure section is a recipient of a much wider fund, and that certainly works to the advantage.
But presumably, once that investment has been made, there is considerable income, as the Convener has said, over a long period, which is going to more than pay back that investment at the moment.
That's certainly the hope, and that was the business case that was put forward to the board. If we hadn't made that business case, we wouldn't have been given the money, but that's where we are at present, and those funds at this point in time are out there at risk, and we're trying to make that work, not just for the Crown Estate, it has to be said, but for the coastal communities round about the UK, the jobs, opportunities, the investment, supply chain, all these opportunities we are trying really hard to maximise.
I mean, developing, if I may, the point that Corey Bemis was pursuing earlier, as I understand what you're saying today, you cannot tell us exactly what Scotland, we know what Scotland brings in, but there seems not to be access to figures that says we bring this in and we get this back from the Crown Estate. Is that the case? You couldn't tell us over a 5-year period what the figures are?
I think in terms of the overall figures, we can be pretty clear in terms of the capital investment side of things, with the exception of the round 3 figures, because of the sort of UK-wide nature of that. And one of the things is we don't allocate all of our costs, and we don't in terms of and to be honest, it would be a slightly arbitrary process to start cutting up our HR costs and our infrastructure costs and office costs and things like that. But it is something that in terms of capital investment and disinvestment, that we can be pretty clear on, and is normally shown in our report. But if you want some more details on that, we'd be happy to provide them.
I think we would welcome that, because if I may say that the Crown Estate over a period from 2009 until this year has been the subject, in terms of its Scottish operations, of criticism by a number of reports. I wonder, from your perspective, which, if any, of these criticisms you would accept as justified, what you're doing to address those criticisms?
One of the main criticisms that always comes up is about communication. And I think we're not the only organisation that is challenged with that. Significant part of we've, if I might go back a step, we've restructured the business in that we used to have a marine estate which included offshore energy and coastal and aquaculture and a coastal estate. Now we've brought the rural and coastal estates together, and in particular for Scotland, I think that works very well, because the type of tenants and customers and stakeholders that we're dealing with are more aligned with each other. We're talking about remote rural communities, villages, community groups, quite often owner sort of trader businesses, as opposed to multinational sort of energy companies. And a significant part of my role is to really sit down and work with the teams to re-engage and how we get out there and do business. You know, it's challenging because we have interests in 50% of Scotland's foreshore. It's a huge geographic area. And looking at our managing agents model, many of you will be aware that on the sort of ground day-to-day management of a lot of our properties is managed by firms of chartered surveyors. And one of the challenges I have is to really look at how they do that on our behalf, because we have to understand the communities that we operate in, and we have to be aligned to those. And that's something that we're working on at the moment. And we're engaging more already than we have done in the past. We're seeking views of members of our liaison group, Scottish Liaison Group, which was actually set up as a result of our last appearance in front of this committee in 2007, to actually say to them, how would you like to engage with us on your business streams? And we had a liaison group a couple of weeks ago, and one of the actions that we've taken out to there is to do sort of small group meetings with industry specialists and sectors in their backyard. So, taking the senior team from Edinburgh, go in and actually have a round-the-table discussion with a specific sector in a specific area to try and make sure that what we're doing is aligned to them. And I don't think any organisation would ever say that their communication was perfect. We have a commitment to do that. It's something we're looking at very carefully. We have committed to really sit down with those outsourced people that represent us and take a view. And I know, for example, the committee's looked quite a lot at agricultural holdings and rents and rent reviews. And it's one of the areas we appeared in front of the Rent Review Working Group, part of the Tenant Farming Forum, is actually how do good relationships be fostered on the ground. And from my point of view, that's all about making sure we have the right people representing us and making sure they understand those businesses. And that's something I want to take forward into further development with the rest of the team to make sure we are responsive. We can't get everything right all the time. Nobody can. But I think we have to be in a position to understand what the local needs are and to be able to respond to them as best we can. And you can't do that from sitting in an Edinburgh office. That's why the team are challenged to get out there as best we can.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up a point, which you touched on there from the autumn issue of the Scotland Bulletin, where you say, Alan Laidlaw, that in recent years we have let on long-term agreements. This is a reletting programme you were talking about, usually to younger members of our tenants' families. And then you're going to explain 2 10-year limited duration tenancies. How can you equate the idea of long-term agreements with 10-year limited duration tenancies?
The most recent examples have been 10-year. I can point to a number of examples of agreements that we did. If you look at the 2003 Act, we were one of the first large-scale landowners, or if not the first, to go out onto the open market with an LDT to successfully let that. What we then did that thereafter, and it's back to Mr. Don's sort of comment about how do we represent Scotland. I took a view that limited partnership tenancies were effectively, a lot of them were coming to an end of their initial duration, and that were, it was a piece of difficult legislation, and I don't think anyone was ever happy with the relationship between a limited and a general partner. So we took a review to get rid of most of those across the estate where they were, and actually use LDTs. And at that time, what we did was we look at the next generation, or the person who's actually in business control. We can all talk about agriculture and the average age of a farmer being 58 to 60 or something like that. But actually, when you look behind them, who's doing the work, they're often in their 30s or 40s. So what we did was we brought those limited partnerships to an end and created new LDTs to the next generation. And we actually took those tenancy terms to 65. So if you're 40, it was a 25-year term. If you're 30, it was a 35-year term. And that was to encourage proper discussion and planning by the businesses with us about long-term succession. And I can think of an example on the Fockerbers estate, which has worked really well. It was a 32-year agreement, I think I'm right, to the son of an existing tenant. And that agreement has now been extended with some additional land, which has been added on another 150, 200 acres onto that. And that's really set that guy up in a great opportunity for that long term. So the open market tenders, it's actually very difficult because once you have a tenant in place, there's very little that you can do to change that. And I think going to the open market for a term of much longer than 10 years is quite difficult because the agreement might not work out. And you could get a really difficult situation that if you'd let for a 30-year term, you're stuck with for 30 years. So I think there is a balance. And I think if you look at our figures against the average, if there was a sort of average available, I think that you would see that we were significantly further ahead of that average because of those long-term tenancies.
When was this 25-year agreement made?
There was a number over the last 3 or 4 years.
It wasn't mentioned this bulletin, obviously it's the autumn bulletin.
No, I mean that they were done a couple of years ago. So I think that the autumn bulletin talked about the recent relettings on the open market at Glenlivet, at Fockerbers, and down in Applegarth and Lockerbie. So, I mean, I think it's good management to make sure that we don't put a business in there for 30 years that might struggle. I would, but equally, on a livestock holding in particular, a 5-year agreement on an SLDT is not going to be anywhere near where that needs to be. So I think what we've done is we've struck a balance between the pragmatic management position, but giving somebody a long enough opportunity to actually get into the holding, make their investment, and then make a return. And I think that's important, is to make sure that we realise that, especially on stock holdings, you need to have a longer term agreement. But equally, some of the people that we're letting to, or the people that are proposing to letting, have got very limited track records and experience. So there's, I think 10 years is a fair reflection. And while I'll make no guarantees, but if everything's going well and they're paying us a good rent and looking after the holding well, it would be unlikely that we would be looking to change that. But I think it's a matter of balance in that.
It was useful to hear your views on that. It's obviously something we're dealing with in another place, but on the other hand, in terms of the agricultural part, is it? And then Dick Lyle after that. Claudia?
It was continuing on, Convener, the local engagement in relation to the managing agent contracts. But if you'd like me to leave that for...
Could you just hold on a second? I think Dick Lyle had and we'll come into that after a final one.
Thank you, Convener. It's actually to go back, Mr Laidlaw, to the comments you made earlier on engagement with local communities and with individuals. Crown Estate's a massive holdings in Scotland, public body, but as you quite rightly say, some public bodies just don't listen to local people. So could you expand on what listening you're doing, what you're doing about that, what steps you are taking to engage with local communities and individuals to ensure that you are listening, as you said a minute ago?
Thank you very much. It is a challenge because of the geography, and we have, I suppose, 2 avenues. We have the managing agents to act on our behalf, and then we have the internal team. And we try and gel that as closely as we can so we know what's going on in each area. Because actually, local communities are quite often better served by somebody far closer, rather than having to come all the way to us for an opportunity to speak or to answer. All of our team are out at industry events. As I say, we've got the Scottish Liaison Group, which brings in our sort of key stakeholder group, and most of them are membership organisations. And that has helped really improve the relationships from when I sat at the first Liaison Group meeting, which was following at the Rural Affairs Committee, as I say, in 2007. And we've now got far better dialogue with those membership organisations. So if there is a problem, they can flag it up informally or formally, whichever suits. And that means we're in a far better position to know the ins and outs of that transaction. On a sort of local level engagement in the community, we have, on our rural estates, we've got forestry and ranger staff that meet with the local community on on issues such as community engagement projects or schools projects and things like that. On the marine estate, on the coastal estate, we've got a couple of moorings officers, and their sole sort of remit is to look across the west coast moorings, of which we've got 5,500, to make sure they understand the dynamics of each different community. And as I say, I'm relatively new to the coastal side of things, but I think it's very clear that each bay or loch has a different set of challenges. Alex here is based in Argyll, and looking after our aquaculture interests. So we're trying to just make sure that we have a coverage across the portfolio, and at the same time that when there are industry events that we attend and that we have a profile. Because I think certainly one thing I've learned from the rural estate is if people know who you are and know how to get in contact with you, and you know that the door is open should there be a problem on the ground, they don't necessarily need to see you every month. If they know how the communication channels work, that they will follow them up, and as long as you've got enough of a dialogue to be able to continue that. But as I say, one of the things we're looking to do following the liaison group a couple of weeks ago was actually take that out more onto the ground. Gareth Baird, the Scottish Commissioner, and I were on Lewis, North and South Uist and Harris in the summer. We have a number of different sort of ways to get out there, and it's work in progress, I'll be honest. We've got to continue to do more of that, and if anyone has constituency interests or any suggestions of how we can do that, I would be very happy from my side of things to make sure that we had a seat at that table.
That was the very point I was going to come on to. You've told us what you want to do and how you're going to try and do it, but quite often we hear that from quite a number of companies and quite a number of organisations. Would you say that you're now a listening organisation, and in particular to politicians, local councillors, community councils, all the other forums which I'm sure you interact with in the length and breadth of the country? Are you now listening?
I would, excuse me, from my point of view, I would say yes, absolutely. If I think of the meetings that Ronnie and I have in the diary, we were up with Highland Council a couple of weeks ago. We're seeing COSLA tomorrow. We've got dates in the diary for Argyll and Butte early into the new year. We've met with Community Land Scotland and others. So, we are actively doing that, and I would hope that those who do engage with us would see that we were a listening body, and we try and be as active as possible as we can in this very building as well, and to try and meet with members, particularly where their constituency interests have a significant overlap into our portfolio, and we are absolutely committed to doing that.
Thank you. Claudia Beamish, I think, on local engagement.
Thank you. On further on from the question by Richard Lyle, could I just seek a little further clarification in relation to local engagement and accountability and transparency, perhaps, especially in view of I understand that you have launched the re-tendering and restructuring process for your managing agent contracts in Scotland. And I just would like to read to you something that you yourselves have said, which is that our agents are a key interface with local communities and customers. A new structure and approach will embed these agents firmly in the local communities in which they operate. And you've given us some idea, Mr. Laidlaw, of how that is developing. But I would like to know, in relation to that and other matters which Mr. Lyle raised, about whether, for instance, there are minutes of liaison meetings that are accessible on websites, whether your moorings officers, when there are engagements with local communities, how these are reported, because it's very important to us between now and this time next year to be able to access these details and to be familiar with how this new model of listening is developing.
Happy to provide that. What I would say is that the process of tendering the AMAs is one that we're working on at the moment, because in north of the border in Scotland we're leading on this, and so that I'm absolutely certain that we need to really specify that properly, because with anything, you know, the best provision of service comes from the best sort of instructions. So that's something we're working on at the moment. And actually, what we've done over the last few months since that was written was to be engaging with a lot of our stakeholder groups and say, look, you know, have you got suggestions of how this can be done better? In terms of
just and ask you, how can we find out how that specific aspect of things, which would be a concern to the committee, is progressing? Are there reports on how that's developing? How the interface between your agents and the communities is progressing, so that we don't wait till next year to find out how that's.
I think right. Sorry. What I would say is that we are just developing the model at the moment to go out to tender. So I suppose if you're wanting an update before next year, we would be happy to once we get that scope of services available, I could share that with the clerk if you would like. And I suppose that would be the next logical step.
I'm sorry I interrupted you, but just...
No, that's fine. I think in terms of formal sort of liaison group meetings and things like that, minutes would be available. I think a lot of the, in particular, the moorings officers you talked about and our rangers, a lot of what they're doing is speaking to people while they go about their business. And I, for one, would be slightly reticent to accept that we started, you know, met Mr. Smith at the bottom of, you know, Tom and Towel Village, and he said, and that being recorded in some sort of system in terms of data protection and all those sort of things. I think if you'd like to know about the spread and width of the engagement, I think that's possible, you know, in terms of the type of meetings that the agents attend. You know, I've looked at figures from each one of our agents in terms of the different community groups and meetings that they attend, and they are substantial. So I think we could work on some sort of transparency of that. I would say I would be nervous because
I don't think that's what I was wanting.
Sorry.
And I don't think that would be productive. So if that's what you thought, that certainly wasn't what I was trying to imply. Thank you.
Can I just add, if I may, on the coastal officers' side, is we try to encourage them to improve our accessibility. And as Alan said, it's not that every conversation is monitored or reported, but what we're keen to do is that either they, through their going about their business, they encourage people, if they do have concerns or they do wish to get in contact or just have simple queries about developments, to get in touch directly with us. And we, you know, and we prefer to talk to people directly on the phone. You can't report those, obviously, but through the coastal officers, and sometimes also through some of the representatives of particular interests that we have. For example, West Highlands Moorings Association. Again, we use a lot of cross-sectoral communication, and that again is just as Alan said. We can't always get out and talk to everyone, but we are very keen that people have the ability and feel comfortable in talking to us if they want to.
If there was a question about a particular mooring, would we come to you directly to ask about the process? You employ the moorings officers, I take it.
That's correct, yes. I think if there's 9 times out of 10 our moorings officers will know the individuals in an area. If there's an escalation, by all means contact us, you know, by email initially or by phone and have a chat about that side of things. And many communities know that process very well and do engage with our coastal team.
Clearly in your interest to have an income from moorings, have you extended the area of moorings from which you get an income in the last year? And
I'm not sure that we've taken any. I mean, there may be more moorings because more people have looked to put moorings in the water because of the increase in the recreational side of things. But I'm not sure that we've extended the area in any.
We're encouraging people who have moorings or want to have moorings to take out or to form moorings associations. And this does 2 things. For them, it allows their localised management of those moorings. Very often, a localised management is usually more conducive to just getting everyone that they want into their particular organisation. The costs halve as well per mooring. I'm not quite sure what our latest moorings charges are, but I think it's about £70 per annum for a mooring. If you're part of a moorings association, you pay £30 per annum. And we're moving to try and have a sort of a more local control, as I say, through moorings associations.
On that point, Margaret McDougall would like.
Just on that point of local management agreements, I noticed that you have announced 2 pilots, one being in Portree on Skye and the other in Lochmaddy on North Uist. And, you know, where you say that the bodies will have more powers over the management of the foreshore and the seabed. So could you perhaps give more detail on how these models will work and what progress has been made in establishing that?
In terms of, on our LMA process, it is very clearly a pilot. And the main reason it's a pilot is because I don't think we can come up with all of the sort of structures and the side of things that would be necessary for each individual set of circumstances. So the 2 pilot projects that you've mentioned are progressing, not quite there as far as I'm aware, but they are progressing, and we are looking for more opportunities to sit down with communities and see what would work for them. I think it would be slightly arrogant if we'd been very prescriptive of this is the only structure that can work. And part of the call for LMAs was to say, you know, if there are situations locally, we reiterated at the liaison group last week, saying if you are aware of situations where you think this might benefit, please do come forward and see us. There are also a number of communities that are more progressed in terms of their proposals, and they're looking at direct investment projects as well. And so they're in discussion with lease agreements. So I think the LMAs is very clearly a pilot because we want to try and make sure that it fits with what's on the ground rather than it fits from an office remotely. But progress we are progressing on those 2 pilots. I would hope to get them moving sooner rather than later and get those sort of completed.
So is there any time scale then for when you would expect to see them up and running?
I would hope as soon as possible, bearing in mind that a lot of these are community groups and it's not necessarily their core focus. We've provided some resource in terms of business planning for some of them to be able to actually help them with those sort of constitutional side of things to make sure they get themselves set up properly. But again, because it's not necessarily their only focus, you know, they might be running a business or doing something else. Much of that lies with them, but we're working quite closely with them.
Now, just continue on that theme. Regards the financial setup of these organisations, then would they then be self-sustaining organisations?
That would be our aspiration. That any of the you know, in terms of LMAs, we want to be able to have communities looking after their areas, but financing themselves, if at all possible. And a lot of the proposals that we've looked at over the last few years that have helped us develop the LMA sort of concept have been people looking to get an interest in the area before they go off for other sources of funding. And indeed, you know, the Coastal Community Fund is something that's created a great deal of interest around Scotland's coast, and people are obviously going to be looking at for opportunities there to take forward proposals to gain access to grant funding. So, you know, that's one of the things that LMAs hopefully will help with.
They would keep, and that would be reinvested in the...
If there was, if they're doing projects themselves of the community nature, they will look to be self-sustaining. If we're putting direct capital in as an investment, we might look to have a return, but that's something that's moving on to more of a commercial lease. And LMAs, I think, would probably tend to be slightly at the smaller scale.
So there would be a commercial lease then, is that what you're saying?
Well, it depends if they're looking for larger areas or if they're looking for us to invest capital. Because quite a lot of the schemes will have a sort of a menu approach probably. You know, they might start off small, but they might look to grow in the future.
Right, so where you're investing, you will expect a return on your money?
If we're putting direct commercial investment in, yes. If we're putting in, we've I don't know if the committee got a copy of our Marine Stewardship Programme review from last year, but I think that you know, that shows a lot of the projects that we grant fund, so the smaller scale projects that we put money into without any expectation of any return, because we believe that they are aligned with good management, improving facilities and things like that. And you know, there's a number of different examples where we've put sort of 15,000–20,000 into pontoons and piers from Shieldaig to Shetland to Battersea to Applecross, and again Those are just grants, so they're straight sort of funding given to the project without a commercial return expectation.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Convener. Could I just ask a little bit more about these agreements? And I'm wondering the extent to which the communities will have the decision-making powers in the agreements, and also whether those agreements can be accessible to the committee, so we can understand what sort of agreements there are that are being made available in discussion with communities, and whether there are any plans to have larger agreements, possibly with harbours and with different places as well.
I think we've got a draft pack that we're busy launching that will support this document, which you may well have seen, and that includes a sort of draft documentation. But again, they are in draft because of the very pilot nature. So that would be available, and that would get a look at that. But I think because of the individuality of each project, they're always going to be tailored to that. So I think at the moment the easiest thing we could do would be to give you the draft documentation that's out there in public, and then if you want some further details of completed projects, we could probably do so. Some of them might be sensitive to each of the communities, but most of it should be out there, so I wouldn't see...
Interested in is the community, how much community decision-making, how much power will be in the hands of the communities? Well,
that's again back down to each individual agreement, because some of the projects are very tight in their mandate, and they're very specific about, I don't know, a very small area. And some of them might be over larger areas where we'd have to agree in terms of what was appropriate. So I think it's quite difficult to say before we get into one of those sort of discussions as to where those boundaries would be. Because if the tighter the area is drawn, and then the clearer the use is, and the less opportunity for competing uses to come into that area, then the more control that would be available there.
So would you be looking as the Crown Estate then, without wanting to put words into your mouth, but to ask the question, for community empowerment in relation to these agreements?
Well, I think all of these agreements are designed to let communities have more of an interest. So, the community empowerment is a very wide phrase, and I think enabling them to be able to have an interest in things that a management interest in things that interest them locally, I think that would align with community empowerment, and that's why we've looked to go down this route.
Without wanting to quibble, an interest is quite a different word to community empowerment, I think, but I'm just trying to understand where the Crown Estate is coming from in becoming a more listening organisation, but beyond that, the extent to which you're looking to empower the communities that you are involved with.
Empowered communities create opportunities, don't they? We all know that. We can all point to examples where that level of engagement and empowerment makes great opportunities. And that is always going to be in the interests of an owner of a property, whether it be Glenlivet or anything like that, And that's why we look to encourage that. Successful communities and vibrant communities will create more opportunities. And that will benefit the Crown Estate, because we'll have to, there'll be less costs potentially. There'll be more return if there are direct investment available. So I think we are absolutely aligned with very, very successful rural and remote rural communities. And that's one of the things away from LMAs. But I think if we look at Tom and Towel as an example that I know very well, Tom and Towel is an area that has been very challenged economically for a very long time. And we have worked very closely with the newly formed in the newly forming a development trust. That's absolutely in our interests, is to make sure that centre of the village is vibrant and healthy, and whatever we can do to support that within our mandate is very clearly aligned with what we've been doing. And so we've supported that in terms of provision of space, provision of managing agent resource to help with mapping and scoping, to engage with the community to see what happens. Because I think, very much that if that works, it benefits everybody. Scotland PLC, the local community and the Crown Estate. It's a win-win.
Thank you. And just lastly, through the convener, do you have any plans that you can share with us about the possibility of these agreements in relation to larger harbours?
We aren't in any discussions at the moment, and larger harbours tend to have more than one sort of interest. And what what we're happy to do is sit down with any of those areas where they feel that it would be appropriate to do so and have those discussions.
I want to follow this up because in your autumn bulletin about community management on the coastline, you refer in your bulletin to the debates taking place in the Scotland Bill Committee and indeed the Scottish Affairs Committee. And you state, following the report issued by the Scottish Affairs Committee inquiry, was a need to give communities more control over coastal assets. Don't you think that's a gross understatement of what that report said? Indeed, it's misleading.
I think that we acknowledge that communities have a growing interest in these areas, and within the confines of what we are able to do at the moment, we believe that LMAs and other agreements discussing things with communities are helping move that forward.
But this isn't progress on a grand scale. You've admitted that just now. Do you think that your critics don't understand your position? Or do you not understand why there are so many critics of the way in which coasts are managed?
I think the pilots, as I say, are progressing, and we would like to see more agreements brought forward. And that progress will come from there. I don't think that we can dictate that certain things happen at certain times. I can understand where people don't necessarily view our management interests aligned with theirs. But I think, as you said yourself, this area does need managed, and we need to be able to work with with the communities on best to achieve that. I think in terms of progress, LMAs have been launched throughout the last 6 months. We have restructured our business. We are looking to retender our managing agents, and I think all these are in that direction of travel. But it will take time to progress these things.
Just to firm up then on local management agreements, how many are in the pipeline?
We've got the 2 pilots at the moment, and we're in discussion with a handful of others. But I mean, I would genuinely say if you believe that there are areas out there that could benefit from these, we're happy to have that discussion. We reiterated that to the leader of Highland Council the other day, and we'll be saying that to COSLA tomorrow and to the other authorities in the coming months. So, genuinely there is an appetite to engage there. But I do believe that engagement has to come from the grassroots to start with. Otherwise, we would be imposing, which would be even more badly received.
So it's at a very early stage. I've got a question about Orkney just now, which Nigel Don wants to ask.
Yes, thank you. I think this is getting nearer the rough water, which I can visualise because I have been there and I'm aware of EMEC. But I recall seeing somewhere something about a memorandum of understanding with Orkney Islands Council, and I'm just wondering whether you can give me a bit more on that and why it should be necessary, please.
For some time, we've been looking to engage with a number of the different councils, and I think there's been discussions regarding memorandums of understanding for probably the last 3 or 4 years. And I think, I suppose to answer the question, why do we believe that these should be necessary? I think that there are a lot of different areas of interest that are very clearly aligned, and that's where business can be done very simply. And then there are other areas of interest which maybe we don't understand, or they don't, the local authorities don't necessarily aren't as aligned. And I think it's an opportunity to sit down and agree the areas of work for mutual interest and benefit. And that's something that hasn't made a lot of progress recently. But again, when we met with Highland Council, they were very keen, and as we are, to try and make progress on that MOU. And at one time, it was being discussed with 6 local authorities, I think, covering sort of Argyll and Bute, right round to Highland and Western Isles and Orkney and Shetland. And it's something that we believe just makes the understanding of both sides better for mutual benefit and ultimately for communities and the local economy to benefit.
Can I just pick up on the structure of this, please, Convener? Would I be right in thinking, and let's just talk Orkney just for a moment, that the Crown Estate would own all the foreshore and clearly all the water within working distance? Would that be fair?
In terms of Orkney?
Yes.
In terms of, Alex, if you could help on...
Seabed, yes. Foreshore, no. Parts of Orkney will be subject to, I think, Udal law, Udal title, and if I'm correct. But irrespective of that, Crown Estate only owns about 50% of the foreshore around Scotland anyway.
Right. I guess it's always interesting when people say Udal law, because I have it on the record in this place that Udal law no longer stands in Scotland, but right. just ignore that for the moment, because I think it's not going to help us. What then would the memorandum of understanding need to cover? I guess I'm trying to get a handle on what kind of cooperation you need.
If I may, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's about cooperation, it's about speaking with each other, it's about formalising liaison, and that's certainly, when Alan and I were up speaking with Highland Council last week, that was the nature of the discussions we were having there. I think we also have to recognise that at a working level, certainly with respect to the Pentland Firth and Orkney Waters Leadership Forum, both Orkney Islands Council and Highland Council are part of that and work with us to manage that programme. But the memorandum of understanding would just be a formalisation, a recognition of ongoing cooperation and ongoing liaison.
Why did you need it?
People seem to think it would be a good idea to have formal liaison with the Crown Estate, and we are more than happy to do so.
Okay.
I can give an example. We've been in touch with the Orkney Islands Council on their planners with regard to a potential zoning pilot in Orkney. They've been just working recently. I think they've just published their supplementary guidance to fish farm location and planning, and we've offered to participate with them in looking at zoning to accommodate aquaculture in Orkney and how that might be accommodated for the best interests of both the biosecurity and the natural heritage of Orkney and the fish farming industry.
Right, but that's very helpful then. But then I guess the question is, if you've formalised that to some extent with Orkney, would you not want to do that with every other council?
I mean, that's something we're looking to progress, and that's one of my core roles to look at that. I think a lot of the formalisation comes back to Richard Lyle's point of people knowing that they can engage with us, and I think just with a light touch, it's not war and peace, sort of noting of where mutual interest is, where mutual cooperation should be, and how often we engage at a senior level and at an operational level. I think it helps strengthen those relationships. But you're absolutely right; it's something we are looking to do more of if we can. Some people might say it's not necessary because we've already got a very good relationship, but I think it just helps sort of. No, I don't think it's formalised. It just helps encourage both sides to really maintain the effort into that dialogue.
Thank you for that. Just before we move on to the rough waters of aquaculture, etc., Claudia Beamish has another small...
I wonder if I could just go back, Mr Laidlaw, to your comments about the land management agreements in relation to you don't want to dictate to communities, which of course I completely respect. But surely there is some balance whereby the Crown Estates, I would hope, would be proactive in informing communities about the possibilities of availability of land management agreements. And I wonder if you could highlight for the committee the ways in which you do that, and whether indeed there's a list available publicly of communities that you do engage with on that basis, and in a formal way to explain to communities that these possibilities and other ones for more community engagement are available.
Yeah. as I say, we drafted the information pack very much with a view to actually making it digestible for anyone who wanted to pick it up and look at it, who may have an interest to sow that seed. You know, to start them thinking, well, actually, is this something that works for me down in my area? We've launched that. We are just about to send that out to a lot of the community groups. Our managing agents are using that with the engagement of the established communities that they already know, because it's highly likely that they've got some sort of relationship with them already, and this could just help sort of formalise or help them take on to the next level. So I think you know, that was formally launched at our reception when our board were up at the end of September next door in Dynamic Earth. But I don't think. I think the list of the engagement that we talked about earlier with the community groups that our managing agents already have relationships with, or that our staff already have relationships with, would mirror the list that we're promoting this to. But again, you know, if there are groups and organisations that you know, need to know more about this, we're happy to do that. You know, I was speaking to some of our colleagues from the Scottish Coastal Forum recently to say, you know, where is the best avenue and opportunity to make sure we get this to the widest audience. And again, we met with Moorings Scotland, who we've got a very good relationship with, a couple of weeks ago, and said, look, if you know of areas where this is something that may be of interest or appropriate, please do say so. So you know, it is as the convener says, it's early days, but we do remain committed to getting these out there. So any help that you can point us in the right direction, we would be grateful to do that to supplement the work that we're already doing.
See, I'm not terribly reassured by that answer, because I feel that, frankly, that the Crown Estate should know where those communities are. I know it's difficult sometimes to define what a community is, because there are, you know, different stakeholders, but there are quite fragile rural communities that we in this committee obviously have concerns about throughout Scotland, not only in the Highlands, throughout the whole of Scotland. And I would hope that you would be able to, now that you've got your pilots going, furnish the committee with a list of those communities that you would be looking at to engage with in a proactive way, to inform them about these land management agreements. I think that would be very helpful.
I think what I'm saying is that our managing agents are already doing that. So I think that...
About that is the point I'm making. And I would appreciate, as a member of the committee, if you were able to inform the committee about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to aquaculture and fisheries. Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. If I could turn specifically to aquaculture and fisheries, you'll be aware that the call for evidence on the aquaculture and fisheries bill is currently ongoing and is still open. Can I ask, has the Crown Estates made any submission to date to the consultation, and if so, can I ask what your initial views are on the bill?
Yes, well, we responded on the original proposals for the bill, and we will be responding on the committee's consultation. I can't say it's there yet, but it's in progress, definitely, and you'll be receiving it. Our thoughts on the bill, on balance, I think it will be more of a help than a hindrance. I think my view is it'll form a safety net. A lot of the proposals in the bill do concern measures that a lot of the industry undertake already, but I think it is probably useful that, certainly on things like farm management agreements and containment and the wellboat practices, that there is this legislative safety net to ensure that there's a standard that everybody adheres to, because it's no good, given the nature of the shared space and the nature of the interests and how they overlap for a lot of aquaculture interests, it's no good that just 95% of the industry is doing a good job. You need 100% to give the security to the rest of the industry. So, as I say, on balance, I think it's a reasonable bill. I think it will help.
So, in general, you're fairly comfortable. Clearly, Crown Estates will have some input into research in aquaculture and fisheries related to your own specific interests. In what way do you contribute to research in this field? And could I also ask, in your preamble, you mentioned the marine biomass sector. I was hoping you could perhaps expand on that, in particular the demonstration projects that you mentioned and any progress that there is to date.
Just to take the research and development first, we contribute, we spread with a view to trying to accommodate as much as we can. So we contribute a minimum core amount of funding to the Scottish Aquaculture Research Forum. And that's in the region of, I think, about 30,000 a year. The bulk of the funding goes into projects that we think we aim to have a short turnaround time that will deliver something of practical value that can be used relatively quickly. So, for example, this year, the projects that we're involved in, or that funding is going into, is we're putting money into a company in Argyll, Otterferry Seafish, to develop protocols for hatching wrasse. You may be familiar that wrasse are being looked at increasingly as a cleaner fish to help with biological control of sea lice, one of the industry's major bugbears. We're looking at, we are putting money into SAMS in Oban to look at jellyfish blooms. Is there the possibility of early detection of jellyfish blooms? We had a very successful project on looking at harmful algal blooms, and we're seeing it'll transfer across. We're looking at the carbon budgeting of various sectors, so shellfish and finfish. And then just on the marine biomass side, one of the spends is also looking at the environmental impacts of large-scale seaweed farms. And just getting onto that, yes, I mean, we're looking at marine biomass is our 9th business sector. It's a bit of a strange one simply because it sits midway between aquaculture and energy. And from our point of view, our interest is in large-scale offshore cultivation that will form a raw material for energy and possible for chemicals as well. There will inevitably be smaller inshore developments that will probably be regulated under an aquaculture banner, if you like, and those will probably feed into food and pharmaceutical. But the work that we're doing is to do with, initially we've undertaken studies to examine the processes to which you can subject the seaweeds of interest, and the main seaweeds are the kelps. And then the products that you can get from those processes, and then the markets for those products as well. So, for example, we consider that anaerobic digestion or co-digestion of seaweed together with organic waste offers some real potential. And there's interest there, if you like, from particularly local rural community or island energy economies. I think there's already some AD plants on one or two of the on the Outer Hebrides. So using seaweed for that is useful in a more localized context. There is then the wider concept that ultimately we want to move things like biofuel raw material out to sea if we can. Everyone's aware of the drought and flood and implications on grain harvest and terrestrial biomass. And so moving, as the EU Commission has said, there's a blue growth initiative to try and move those things offshore. So that's part of the initiative as well. So all of our studies are looking at enabling and filling gaps. So we've done the environmental one, we're looking at the carbon budgets again, and the greenhouse gas emission record looks good for anaerobic digestion as opposed to, say, looking at bioethanol. We've just put a paper together for our board to look at this demonstration project in Argyll. What we're hoping to do is address the logistics. Everybody knows that seaweed grows. It grows pretty much wherever you want it. The trick is putting it out there in the form that you want it, particularly with regard to the species, and more importantly, bringing it back. And if we can get the logistics of that sorted, that will allow them to be then developed at a scale that can be a reasonable raw material, considered a reasonable raw material for things like biofuels. That's ultimately our ambition. Because while we've got wind power, we've got wave and tidal power, what we also need is fuels, if you like, in the form of gas or or liquid fuels, and that's more likely to come from a marine biomass sector. There's a lot of interest around the North Sea, from Denmark to Norway to Holland, and we're collaborating and in contact with a lot of those organisations. So the biomass project, one last thing I'd say on it is that we have a macroalgae or seaweed forum where we do bring all these parties together, because there's a lot of parallel streams of interest in Scotland, around Europe, and what we're hoping to get is gather these together, so we're not only developing our own work but also just sharing this with others and making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, if you like.
It's clearly an exciting development, so I'm sure this committee will be watching closely any progress. Can I ask when the report on the environmental impacts is expected, and can you share that with the committee when it's completed?
Yes, happy to. It should be available now. It'll be on our website, as will be the report on the carbon budgeting of various products from seaweed. Happy to pass those on for the committee, but they're also available in the public domain on our website.
Okay. Thank you.
Claudia Beamish, quickly.
The Crown Estate has a responsibility for the wider protection of the marine environment and to try to restore and enhance it, or possibly not enhance it, that's for you to say, but more generally. Could you clarify for the committee in what ways the Crown Estate is reinvesting some of the income to make sure that the marine environment is protected?
It's probably part of we have a wider stewardship fund and an R&D fund that Alan mentioned. A lot of it is to address the sustainable nature of the developments that we get involved in. They won't necessarily, and if there may be particular conservation projects, and I know colleagues around the UK have had specific interest in particular conservation projects. But on a wider thrust, and certainly from an aquaculture point of view, it's looking at how we can make the economic developments more sustainable. And in that regard, you protect the biodiversity and you protect the long-term interests of natural heritage. So it's not just a conservation element. It's looking at as I say, everybody uses the sustainability word, but that's the key to it. It's just rendering aquaculture more sustainable. So, for example, things like the work that we're putting into RAS, and the other one is looking at bringing interests like wild fisheries and farmed fish interests together to try and develop management practices rather than relying, for example, on therapeutic compounds or things like that.
We have also undertaken the largest aerial bird survey in the world around the coast of the UK, and again, cetacean protocols, various projects of that nature, both under the Round 3 and under the wave and tidal enabling actions, are all aimed at the environment and working with that.
Another small example would be something like the Fishing for Litter Scotland project, which we fund 30,000 a year for 3 years, and identifying, getting litter out of the system and working with other bodies on those.
Graham Day wishes to follow up this point.
If I may, just following on the reference you made to the seabird survey, I'm wondering what has emerged from that would inform how we proceed with offshore renewables. Does it tell us that we may have to restrict locations, for example?
What it does is it provides a background, and it informs and helps the developers pinpoint exactly where they carry out their detailed analysis that will be required for them going forward for their consent. So it provides that overall background. And one of the other things we've established it's getting a bit long in the tooth now, but the Cowrie website is still there producing data going forwards. So so far as the aerial bird survey in particular was concerned, it produced a baseline, if you like, a background against which things could be measured and assessed, and it would give identified species that would be of interest in a particular area, for example.
The subject of carbon capture and storage is something which you've been interested in. Angus MacDonald, to kick off on that.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Before I do, perhaps I should declare an interest, given my involvement at an early stage of the Summit Power application for a 500 megawatt electricity plant and CCS project in Grangemouth. As we know, the UK government announced 2 weeks ago that carbon capture projects in Peterhead and Grangemouth have both made it onto a 4-year project shortlist that will be considered for financial assistance in the new year. And we also know that Scotland has the largest CO2 storage capacity in Europe. Given the Crown Estate announced in July the UK's first agreement for lease for permanent geological storage of CO2, can perhaps yourself, Mr Quinn, give us more detail on the development and what the next steps in the process are?
To be honest, Mr MacDonald, you've probably outlined it very well yourself there. What we've done is cooperated with DEC in their programme and identified, in conjunction with them, sites that would be suitable for the storage. This is, as you know, as the committee is well aware, this is the second bite at the cherry, as it were. We entered into the agreement for lease for the GoldenEye project. If that then goes ahead and is one of the winners in the eventual competition, then in due course we'll grant a lease for that. But as the committee is well aware, this is in its embryonic stages. We are happy and working hard to try and make this work, both with DEC and with potential bidders into the competition, both in identifying sites. And in fact, this is one of the areas we had a presentation from academics to the Scottish Liaison Group last week, the week before, talking about how this works in practice and the mechanics of it, and how the carbon is physically stored in these chambers. So all I would reiterate is you gave a very, very good summary of where we are at the present time.
Clearly, I think we're all hoping that there are no more further delays from the UK government and look forward to progress in the future.
Thank you for that. Any other questions on carbon capture? No. Well, if that's the case, in case you're getting queasy, we'll come back onto dry land. I'd like to ask you first of all about assets and property transfers, which we haven't talked about, and focus on the Kings Park in Stirling. We're aware of recent developments whereby a group of historians, led by Professor Smout, for the Historiographer Royal, and others have suggested that it's a very important significant part of Scotland's heritage. Given that in 1999 the Royal Palace in Edinburgh and so on was passed over with the Holyrood Park, why do you think you should sell the King's Park in Stirling rather than just hand it over to Scottish ministers?
If I may just give you a brief update from where we've got to now. We met with both Historic Scotland, representing the Scottish Government, and Stirling Council last week, and had a pretty wide-ranging discussion about where we've got to with Stirling. The transfers to which the convener talks about in 98-99 were areas that had never been under the management of the Crown Estate and were not subject to any management prescription or value therefrom. And so they were able to be transferred at no consideration. And areas like West Princess Street Gardens, which is something that the Scottish Affairs Committee had also identified as being of interest, is something that we are making significant progress with Edinburgh Council, who have been the leaseholders of that area since 1870 or thereabouts. There are areas at Stirling which are subject to commercial leases to private individuals or the golf course or Stirling Council that have a value and would continue to have a value thereafter. And therefore, the Crown Estate Act is very clear about transferring assets at value. What we're looking at the moment is working with the Council and Historic Scotland in light of the new information provided from Professor Smout, which wasn't available when we started down this route and discussing the transfers about 5 or 6 years ago. And the proposal that had gone through Stirling Council was that the land be settled into some sort of guardian trust, and therefore that offered the best protection for the long-term protection of that asset. And that's why we're still wanting to discuss with the Council and with Historic Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Government, the best way to do that. The challenge is that value exists in these assets because there are commercial rents being paid. Not all of the area, perhaps, is under that sort of management, and that's where we're looking to see what we can do with Historic Scotland and Stirling Council.
So commercialism is the first principle of your organisation, and it seems to be paramount in terms of Stirling because of this income at the present time. Is it not possible to accept that there's been a mistake made and that indeed it should be treated much like Holyrood Park.
What we're looking at is trying to find a workable solution, and this information has just only become available, and that's why we're sitting down with all the different bodies involved.
So we can get some further information from you as that debate develops.
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty fast developing. I think there's an aspiration from the council to make progress before the December council meeting. So I'll liaise with the clerk to make sure that the committee's kept abreast of progress there, however you wish to be kept updated.
We would very much like to, and that raises the point about if we review the session that we've had, we may well have written questions to follow it up with. So at that stage, we'll probably follow up that one. There was a further question about the actual reducing emissions from the activities of the Crown Estate. Claudia Beamish wanted to follow that.
I think, Mr. Adrian, that you'd already highlighted the carbon accounting. I wonder if we could ask you, whichever of you wish to answer, to give more detail about the Crown Estate more generally as a public body and how it's dealing with its responsibility in relation to the Climate Change Act, and whether it's possible for the committee to see figures for the different sectors that you work in relation to carbon accounting.
I would have to check with colleagues on just what figures were available, but I do know, for example, that our chief scientist was engaged in carrying out, in effect, a sustainability review of all our business sectors. So each sector, I think there were about 36 metrics, carbon accounting being one of them, against which all of our business sectors would have been assessed. And I can certainly check whether those are available, and I'm happy to supply them to the committee. But we have made an assessment across the board, and that informs, if you like, some of the policies that we have with regard to then dealing on a day-to-day basis with the business sectors that we're involved in.
Now, I would go on to say the sort of sustainability agenda is at the heart of the business in the Crown Estate, and one of the main sort of roles I see often is that we don't control the direct activity in terms of whether it be a property or farm or an area of seabed, but part of the wider debate that we can talk about is actually, as Alex has talked about quite significantly, is influencing industry and giving them best practice data. Where it's easier is where we have direct managed properties or we're making developments at the moment. And I can think of the work that our urban team have been doing on making sure that proportion of recycled aggregates within their new buildings, making sure that they're BREEAM excellent, and making sure that there's high levels of energy efficiency in that. So there are a number of different strands that we can report to you on that, as well as our carbon figures. I would say that there's a lot of areas where we are in a similar position to others, is to trying to inform the debate and progress that. If you think about rural properties and 2018 and EPC standards and lettings, there's a real challenge in there because there are stone built without any foundations with combed ceilings. And a lot of the sort of opportunities for quick wins on insulation, things like that are very challenging. And so we are working with partner bodies to identify where we can pilot projects and things like that to try and influence that wider debate. And that's something that I think is very important because there are a lot of unanswered questions out there. And again, that's an opportunity that we can have to influence beyond our assets and into the wider industry.
So through the convener, would the new agreements that are coming forward and tenancy agreements and agreements with communities and with with the aquaculture industry, would all those involve an expectation that there would be carbon accounting and looking at sustainability issues and reporting in a very ordered way on those things?
I think if I could speak as an example, if you look at an agricultural tenancy, if we were to put the requirement on to a tenant that said that they had to do that sort of activity or enhanced environmental activity, that puts us in a very difficult position in terms of EU funding for that business, because then they're doing it as a requirement of their landlord's lease rather than the wider business. So it's quite a difficult thing to prescribe what people should be doing, and I think encouragement is much simpler, and certainly in terms of being anti-competitive and that sort of things, we have to be very careful that we are not imposing additional expectations on people in terms of their businesses. That being said, we absolutely want to try and make sure that all of the businesses that operate across the estate and that we work with are at the forefront of that, and that's why the sort of project work that Alex talks about is ongoing.
It is coming in from a different direction. I mean, for example, just recently I've been involved in a couple of conversations where there's been interest on the part of wave energy device developers to work with aquaculture, because as aquaculture developments get larger and move into more exposed locations, there's definite potential for harnessing some of the natural energy that's out there. And so we will take a role in trying to make that as easy and as simple as possible for those two sectors to actually start working together to combine the benefits that they can gain from co-location and using natural energy.
I think sorry, convener.
Sorry, yeah. I was just simply going to add that in general, there is an increasing focus now on sustainability, and sustainability being taken into general business decisions going forward, and that's being incorporated into the day-to-day business decision-making process as to whether or not this is a sustainable business. Is there anything we can make it do to it to make it more sustainable? And eventually there will come the time when certain decisions will be taken because they're not sustainable.
I think, through the convener, I think it's helpful to hear these anecdotal pieces of evidence, but what I'm really asking is there an assessment tool for carbon assessment as a public body in relation to the Climate Change Act, and if so, could we please see that for the estate in Scotland? And if there isn't, I would expect that as a public body that there should be, if you may say so.
Answers, in some form of a written response to us, and obviously at the moment it's not entirely possible. Okay, I think it's obvious. Right, looking at the role of the Scottish Commissioner and so on, finally, 5 years ago when the Crown Estate Commission appeared before the committee, was because of the level of criticism of your operations in Scotland. So there have been some changes, including the creation of this Scottish Commissioner. To take a lead role across all activities in Scotland, you say. Can you tell us, how that can be evidenced for us? How can we check out how that lead role is actually being carried out, especially because of it will mean reporting to the main committee in London. What's the kind of format that we could find out how this representation is taking place? Because we need to know that before we ask the next question.
If I may, Convener, yes. Mr Baird is, as you recognise, the Scottish Commissioner. Again, reiterate his apologies, he can't be here today. Mr Baird is incredibly active and is probably one of the most active commissioners within the Crown Estate. He attends meetings both with Alan and with I to various stakeholders and chairs the Scottish Management Board when that meets. On a quarterly basis. In addition to that, we have the interministerial strategic group that's being worked up just now by Treasury, and there's the low-level working group that's being worked up as well. We're trying to cooperate and work with that to as part of the government's response to the SAC report to make these things more visible.
The interministerial group is what?
It's a group that the government has set up. It's to be chaired by a Treasury Minister with membership from the Crown Estate, the Scotland Office, Scottish Government, and with appropriate representation for local authorities, for example, through COSLA or a nominee local authority. So that's an overarching group, and there's a lower level working group that reports into that.
Which involves which people?
The lower group will involve, again, Treasury, Crown Estate, Scotland Office, Scottish Government and COSLA meet more frequently and consider reports on the formal and informal liaison arrangements involving the Crown Estate. So hopefully that will pick up on some of the points that have been coming round the table this morning. And that will report up to the interministerial group. And as it is hoped that that should provide more clarity going forward.
Will we be able to see the kind of reports you make from the Scottish Committee to the central body in London?
That will be a matter for Treasury. We won't be chairing these groups. They'll be set up by Treasury and they'll be going up to the interministerial strategic group. There'll be a member of the Scottish Government will be sitting there as a member of that.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I think it's a wide range of questions. It's only an early stage because there's many more that we might want to follow up on. But certainly we'd hope that the Commissioner could be here for the next time, and therefore my questions at the beginning about when that should take place is something which we'd hope he can get in his diary. I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for the wide range of answers you've given us, and indeed that we will follow this up with some other questions in writing. Thank you very much. I would now suspend the meeting briefly in order to allow the witnesses to leave the room and move into private. Thank you.